The cold steel of Officer Ryan Keller's service weapon gleamed under the fluorescent lights of Maple Grove Supermarket as he aimed it at an unarmed black man reaching for a box of cereal. "Don't move. Keep your hands where I can see them." The rookie's voice cracked with adrenaline, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. What he didn't know was that the calm, composed man in front of him was FBI Special Agent Ethan Cole, and this moment of prejudice would cost him everything. Stick around to see how one phone call brings the entire house of cards crashing down. And hey, drop a comment letting me know what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the automatic doors of Maple Grove Supermarket, creating patterns on the polished linoleum floor that would soon be disrupted by chaos. It was 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday, the kind of drowsy, unremarkable time when most people were either still at work or picking up groceries for dinner. The store hummed with the quiet rhythm of suburban life, shopping carts squeaking the distant beep of scanners, a child's laughter from the candy aisle. Ethan Cole had just finished a grueling 3-day operation tracking interstate weapons trafficking. His suit jacket hung in his car, his FBI badge tucked safely in his back pocket, and his service weapon locked in his vehicle's safe standard protocol when he was off duty. All he wanted was to grab some groceries and head home to his daughter Maya, who'd been staying with his sister while he was on assignment. He moved through the cereal aisle with the measured calm of someone who'd learned long ago that rushing rarely got you anywhere faster. His cart contained the essentials, milk-bread eggs, and Maya's favorite strawberry yogurt. At 6'2", with broad shoulders that spoke of his former college football days, Ethan cut an imposing figure even in his simple white dress shirt and dark slacks. But his demeanor was gentle, almost meditative, as he reached for a box of Honey Nut cereal on the top shelf. "Excuse me, sir?" The voice came from behind him, sharp, authoritative, trying too hard. Ethan's trained instincts immediately cataloged the speaker, young male, nervous. He turned slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Years of law enforcement had taught him that sudden movements escalated situations unnecessarily. Officer Ryan Keller stood 10 feet away, his hand already resting on his holstered weapon. 23 years old, fresh out of the academy just 4 months ago, Keller had the kind of face that still got carded at bars, smooth-shaven, with nervous blue eyes that darted, constantly searching for threats that existed more in his imagination than reality. His uniform was pristine, creases sharp enough to cut paper boots polished to a mirror shine. Everything about him screamed, trying too hard. "Can I help you, officer?" Ethan's voice was steady, professional. He'd been in enough tense situations to know that calm was contagious, but so was panic. "I need to see some identification." Keller said, his voice climbing half an octave higher than he'd intended. He cleared his throat, trying to project more authority. "Now!" Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in assessment. He glanced around the aisle. An elderly white couple had stopped their cart 20 feet away, watching with concern. A mother with 2 young children quickly steered them toward another aisle. The tension was already rippling outward like drops in still water. "Is there a problem?" Ethan asked, keeping his tone neutral. "I'm just shopping for groceries." "Don't make this difficult," Keller said, and now his hand wasn't just resting on his weapon, his fingers were wrapping around the grip. "There's been reports of suspicious activity in the area. Someone matching your description." Ethan almost laughed at the absurdity, but he knew better. He'd heard this script before, lived this scene too many times. "Someone matching my description. Can you be more specific about what suspicious activity you're referring to?" Keller's jaw tightened. The truth was, there had been no report. He'd been patrolling the parking lot, seen Ethan get out of his Dodge Charger. Too nice a car, Keller had thought, for someone who looked like that. He'd followed him into the store, watching from a distance, building a narrative in his head that had no foundation in reality. "Sir, I'm going to need you to put your hands where I can see them and step away from the cart," Keller said, and now he was pulling his weapon from its holster, not quite pointing it, but holding it at low ready. The elderly woman gasped. Her husband, Harold Brennan, a 73-year-old veteran who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam, stepped forward. "Officer, this man hasn't done anything wrong. We've been in the same aisle for 5 minutes. He's just shopping." "Sir, I need you to step back," Keller said without taking his eyes off Ethan. Sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead, despite the store's air conditioning. "This is a police matter." Ethan slowly raised his hands to chest level, palms out, a gesture meant to de-escalate while maintaining his dignity. "Officer, I'm going to reach for my identification very slowly. It's in my back pocket." "Don't move." Keller's weapon snapped up now, directly aimed at Ethan's center mass. His finger moved from the frame to hover over the trigger, a violation of basic firearm safety unless you intended to shoot. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The store seemed to hold its breath. The music playing overhead, some forgotten 80s soft rock, felt obscenely cheerful against the weight of the moment. Ethan could see Keller's hands trembling slightly, could read the fear masquerading as authority in his eyes. This was dangerous. Fear with a gun was always dangerous. "Officer Keller," Ethan said, reading the nameplate on the uniform, "I'm going to comply with your orders. But I need you to know that I'm a federal law enforcement officer. My badge is in my back pocket. If you'll allow me to—" "Shut up." Keller's voice cracked like a teenager's. "I don't want to hear it. Every criminal has a story. Get on the ground. Now." Margaret Chen, a store employee who'd been stocking shelves 2 aisles over, peered around the corner and immediately pulled out her phone. Her hands shook as she started recording. This was wrong. She'd seen Agent Cole in the store before, knew he was one of the good guys. Her cousin worked at the Federal Building downtown and had pointed him out once at a coffee shop, speaking with reverence about his work taking down drug rings. Ethan made a decision. Going to the ground would put him in an even more vulnerable position, and Keller's escalating panic was approaching a tipping point. "Officer, I'm going to remain standing, but I'm not resisting. I encourage you to call for backup or a supervisor. This situation doesn't need to—" "I said get on the ground," Keller screamed, and now his finger was on the trigger, the weapon shaking visibly in his 2-handed grip. "This is your last warning." Harold Brennan's wife Dorothy was already on her phone, but not calling 911. She was calling the direct line to the Maple Grove Police Department, a number she knew by heart from years of organizing neighborhood watch meetings. More specifically, she was calling Chief Frank Doyle's personal cell, a number he'd given to select community members for emergencies. This qualified. "Frank," she whispered urgently when he answered. "It's Dorothy Brennan. You need to get to Maple Grove Supermarket right now. That new Officer Keller, he's got his gun on that FBI agent, the one who helped with the Morrison kidnapping case. It's bad, Frank. It's really bad." Back in the aisle, more shoppers had noticed the commotion. Several had their phones out, recording from various angles. The modern world's response to crisis document first intervened later, but their presence added pressure to an already volatile situation. "Everyone needs to back up," Keller shouted, trying to control a scene that was spiraling beyond his capability. "This is an active police situation." Ethan could see it all unfolding in slow motion, the sweat dripping down Keller's temple. The white-knuckled grip on the weapon, the way his breathing had gone shallow and rapid. He'd seen this before in combat situations in rookies who'd never faced real danger, suddenly confronted with their own fear. The problem was, Keller's fear had created the danger. "Officer Keller," Ethan said, his voice taking on what his daughter called his FBI voice, calm, authoritative, designed to cut through panic. "I'm Special Agent Ethan Cole with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My badge number is 7739. You can verify this by calling—" "Stop talking." Keller's voice was almost a shriek now. "Everyone's got a badge these days. Fake badges, fake IDs. Get on the ground or I will put you down." The threat hung in the air like a noxious gas. Several shoppers gasped. Margaret Chen kept recording her phone, capturing every word, every moment. Later, this video would be viewed 17 million times in the first 48 hours after she posted it. Ethan's mind ran through scenarios. He could comply, get on the ground, hope that Keller's training would kick in once the perceived threat was prone. But something in the young officer's eyes, a combination of fear, prejudice, and desperate need to maintain control, told him that compliance might not be enough. Sometimes the badge and gun attracted people who shouldn't have, either people who saw power as a substitute for competence. "I'm reaching for my badge," Ethan said, and very slowly began to move his right hand toward his back pocket. The gun in Keller's hand swung up higher now, aimed at Ethan's head. "Don't do it, I will shoot." It was at this moment that James Martinez, a 16-year-old stock boy who'd been watching from the end of the aisle, did something that would later be called both brave and foolish. He stepped into view with his hands up and said, "Officer, I work here. This man is a regular customer. He's never caused any problems. He's telling the truth about being FBI. Everyone knows him." "Get back." Keller swung the weapon toward James for a split second before jerking it back to Ethan, his movements becoming more erratic. "Everyone just shut up and get back." The sound of rapid footsteps echoed from the front of the store. Not the measured pace of shoppers, but the purposeful stride of someone on a mission. Chief Frank Doyle had made it from his office to the supermarket in under 4 minutes, running red lights with his sirens on his mind, racing through possibilities. Dorothy's words echoed in his head. That FBI agent, the one who helped with the Morrison kidnapping case. He knew exactly who she meant. Ethan Cole wasn't just any FBI agent. He was the man who'd worked tirelessly for 72 straight hours to bring home the Morrison girl when she'd been taken 6 months ago. He was also the man who'd helped Doyle's own department crack a series of burglaries that had plagued the community for over a year. More than that, he was a friend, someone Doyle had grabbed beers with after successful operations, someone who'd attended Doyle's daughter's wedding just 2 months ago. Doyle burst through the automatic doors, his presence immediately commanding attention. At 57, with silver hair and a linebacker's build that had softened only slightly with age, Francis Michael Doyle looked like what he was, a cop with 35 years on the job, who'd seen everything and tolerated very little nonsense. His uniform was less pristine than Keller's, but carried the weight of actual authority earned through decades of service. He took in the scene in less than 2 seconds. Keller, with his weapon drawn, and aimed Ethan with his hands partially raised, civilians recording with their phones, and the thick tension that preceded tragedy. His expression went from concern to fury in the space of a heartbeat. "Keller!" Doyle's voice boomed through the store like thunder. "Lower your weapon immediately." Keller's head snapped toward his chief, but the gun remained fixed on Ethan. "Chief, I've got a situation here. Suspect refusing to comply with—" "That's not a suspect, you idiot." Doyle was already moving down the aisle, his hand on his own weapon, but not drawing it. "That's Special Agent Ethan Cole, FBI. Lower your weapon now." The words hit Keller like physical blows. FBI. Special Agent. The chief knew him by name. His arms began to shake more violently, but whether from fear or the effort of holding the weapon up for so long was unclear. But he wouldn't show ID, and because you never gave him the chance." Doyle was close enough now that Keller could see the vein pulsing in his temple, could smell the coffee on his breath. "You drew on an unarmed federal agent in a grocery store. What probable cause did you have? What crime did you witness?" There were reports of—" "There were no reports," Doyle said flatly. "I checked the dispatch logs on my way here. You followed this man into the store for no reason other than your own prejudices. Lower your weapon now." For a moment, it seemed like Keller might actually refuse a direct order from his chief. His finger was still on the trigger, his weapon still aimed at Ethan's chest. The entire store seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, like ice melting in reverse, Keller's arms lowered. The weapon pointed at the floor, then went back into its holster with shaking hands. Doyle turned to Ethan, his expression shifting from fury to deep regret. "Agent Cole, I am so sorry. This is not how my department operates. This is not who we are." Ethan slowly lowered his hands, his expression unreadable. He'd learned long ago to keep his emotions locked down in situations like this to process later in private. No harm done, Chief. Though I'd appreciate it if Officer Keller here would allow me to show my identification now, just so we can clear this all up officially. With deliberate movements, Ethan reached into his back pocket and withdrew his FBI badge, flipping it open to display the gold shield and his official identification. Several shoppers gasped, whether at the confirmation of his identity or the realization of how close they'd come to witnessing a tragedy was unclear. Keller's face had gone from red to white, the blood draining as the full impact of his actions hit him. He'd drawn his weapon on a federal agent. He'd threatened to shoot a federal agent. In a grocery store, with witnesses, with cameras. "Officer Keller." Doyle said, his voice now cold and formal. "You are relieved of duty pending a full investigation. I need your badge and gun, now." "Chief, I didn't know." He looked suspicious, and I thought, "You thought what?" Doyle's voice could have frozen water. That a black man in a nice shirt couldn't possibly be shopping for groceries, that he must be up to something. What exactly made him suspicious? Officer Keller. His skin color, the fact that he was reaching for cereal. The questions hung in the air like accusations, which they were. Keller's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. There was no acceptable answer, no explanation that wouldn't confirm what everyone already knew. "Your badge," Doyle repeated, "and your weapon." With trembling fingers, Keller unpinned his badge from his uniform shirt. The sound of the pin coming free seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet store. He handed it to Doyle, then unholstered his weapon, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and handed the unloaded gun to his chief. The very gun he'd been ready to use moments ago. But Doyle wasn't done. In a move that would be replayed countless times on news broadcasts and social media, he grabbed Keller's shoulder and spun him around, then literally tore the police department patch from his uniform sleeve. The sound of fabric ripping echoed through the aisle. "You're suspended without pay effective immediately," Doyle said. "And if I have anything to say about it, and I do, you'll never wear a badge again. Not in my department, not in this state, not anywhere if I can help it." Keller stood there, his uniform disheveled, one sleeve torn, looking like what he was, a young man whose prejudices had just destroyed his career before it had really begun. "Chief, please, I can explain." "Explain to Internal Affairs," Doyle said curtly. "Explain to the FBI when they open their investigation, because you better believe they will. Explain to the district attorney when they review this for potential criminal charges. But right now, you're going to walk out of this store and go home. And you're going to thank God that Agent Cole has more restraint than you do, because if you'd pulled that trigger, you wouldn't just be losing your job, you'd be facing murder charges." The word murder seemed to finally penetrate Keller's shock. His knees actually buckled slightly, and he had to grab a shelf to steady himself. Around them, shoppers continued to record, capturing his humiliation for posterity. Ethan, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "Chief Doyle, I appreciate your response to this situation. I'll be filing a full report with my supervisors, and I'm sure they'll be in touch regarding next steps." "Of course," Doyle said, turning to face him fully. "Ethan, Christ, I don't even know what to say. This isn't who we are. This isn't what I've been building for the last 5 years as chief." "I know, Frank," Ethan said, and for the first time, a hint of the personal relationship between them showed through. "But this is what Officer Keller is, and he made it through your screening, your training, your supervision. That's something you're going to need to address." The words were calm, without accusation, but they cut deep. Doyle nodded, accepting the criticism because it was deserved. "You're right. We've obviously got work to do." Margaret Chen, still recording, called out, "Agent Cole, are you going to press charges?" Ethan looked at her, then at the other shoppers with their phones out, and made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. "I'm going to finish shopping for my groceries," he said calmly. "My daughter is expecting dinner. After that, I'll follow proper channels to ensure this incident is fully investigated and addressed. But right now I just want to buy my cereal and go home." The dignity in his response, the refusal to be driven from the store by prejudice and intimidation, resonated with everyone watching. Several people actually applauded, though Ethan didn't acknowledge it. He simply turned back to the cereal shelf, picked up the box he'd been reaching for when this all started, and placed it in his cart. Keller, meanwhile, began what local news would later call the Walk of Shame. His journey from the cereal aisle to the exit, past dozens of shoppers who now knew exactly what he'd done. Some recorded his passage. Others simply stared with disgust. One woman actually spat at his feet, though she missed. "That's enough," Doyle said to the crowd. "Everyone's safe. Let the man leave." But the damage was done. By the time Keller reached the parking lot, Margaret Chen had already uploaded her video to Twitter with the caption, "Racist cop pulls gun on FBI agent for shopping while black. Watch his chief strip his badge." Within an hour, it had been retweeted 5,000 times. Back in the store, Ethan continued his shopping with forced normalcy, though Doyle walked with him partly as protection and partly out of a need to somehow make amends. They didn't speak much, but their presence together, the black FBI agent and the white police chief, sent its own message. At the checkout, the cashier, a young woman named Angela, who'd been working at the store for 3 years, refused to let Ethan pay. "Your money's no good here today, Agent Cole," she said, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry for what happened. That's not who we are in this community." "I appreciate the gesture," Ethan said gently, "but I need to pay for my groceries. It's important that everything stays normal, that we don't let incidents like this change how we live our lives." Angela nodded, understanding the principle, even if she disagreed with it, and rang up his items. $63.47. Ethan paid with cash, took his receipt, and loaded his bags into his cart. As he headed for the exit, Harold Brennan stepped forward. "Agent Cole, I want you to know I would have intervened if necessary. Some of us old-timers remember when things were worse, and we swore we'd never let them get that bad again." Ethan stopped, looked at the old veteran with his weathered face and determined eyes, and extended his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Harold Brennan, Vietnam 68-70. Thank you for your service, Mr. Brennan, and thank you for being willing to stand up. It matters." They shook hands, and something passed between them, an understanding that crossed generational and racial lines, a recognition of what was right and what was wrong. Outside, the parking lot was already filling with news vans. Someone had leaked the story to local media, and they'd descended like vultures on carrion. Reporters were interviewing shoppers, getting their versions of events. Keller's car was gone, but the space where he'd parked was already being treated like a crime scene by citizen journalists. Ethan loaded his groceries into his Charger, ignoring the shouted questions from reporters, the requests for statements. He had protocols to follow, reports to file, and a daughter to get home to. But as he sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what had almost happened. A young cop's prejudice had nearly ended his life over a box of cereal. The thought was both absurd and terrifying. He'd faced down drug cartels, armed robbers, and terrorist cells, but it was a nervous rookie in a suburban grocery store who'd come closest to killing him. Not because of anything he'd done, but because of who he was, what he looked like. His phone buzzed with texts. His supervisor had already heard. His partner was asking if he was okay. His sister wanted to know if she should keep Maya another night. The modern world moved at the speed of social media, and the story was already spreading beyond Maple Grove, beyond the state, reaching into the national consciousness. Ethan started his car and drove home, knowing that his simple trip to the grocery store had become something much larger. It had become a symbol, a talking point, a rallying cry. Tomorrow, there would be interviews, investigations, and protests. There would be those who defended Keller and those who called for his prosecution. There would be discussions about police training, racial profiling, and systemic reform. But tonight, he just wanted to have dinner with his daughter, to hold her close and be grateful that she still had a father to come home to. He wanted to pretend, if only for a few hours, that the world was safer and more just than it actually was. As he pulled into his driveway, he saw Maya's face in the window watching for him as she always did. She waved enthusiastically, unaware of how close she'd come to becoming an orphan. He waved back, grabbed his groceries, and headed inside, leaving the chaos behind him for now. But the story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Margaret Chen's video had already been picked up by major news outlets. The hashtag serial shooting almost was trending. Keller's name was being searched hundreds of thousands of times. Chief Doyle was fielding calls from the mayor, the governor, and the Department of Justice. In his small apartment across town, Ryan Keller sat in the dark, watching his phone explode with notifications. Death threats. Hate mail. His mother calling repeatedly. His training officer texting to say he was disappointed. His girlfriend asking what the hell had happened. He didn't answer any of them. He just sat there replaying the moment over and over, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. The truth was, it had gone wrong long before he'd walked into that store. It had gone wrong when he'd first put on the uniform with the wrong ideas about what it meant. It had gone wrong when he'd seen a successful black man and assumed criminality. It had gone wrong when fear and prejudice had overridden training and humanity. Back at the Maple Grove Police Department, Chief Doyle called an emergency meeting of all officers on duty. He stood before them, still in his uniform, still carrying Keller's badge and gun, and laid out exactly what had happened. "This is a failure," he said bluntly. "Not just Keller's failure, but our failure. We failed to screen out someone who shouldn't have been wearing a badge. We failed to train him properly. We failed to supervise him adequately. And today, we nearly failed catastrophically." The room was silent. Several officers looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing some of their own prejudices in Keller's actions. Others looked angry, whether at Keller for embarrassing the department or at the situation itself was unclear. "Starting tomorrow," Doyle continued, "we're implementing mandatory retraining for all officers on implicit bias de-escalation tactics and community policing. We're reviewing our hiring practices. We're instituting new oversight measures, and we're going to rebuild the trust that was shattered today, one interaction at a time." Officer Patricia Williams, a 15-year veteran and one of only 3 black officers in the department, raised her hand. "Chief, with all due respect, this isn't just about training. This is about culture." Keller felt comfortable doing what he did because he thought he'd get away with it. He thought the system would protect him. Doyle nodded slowly. "You're right, Williams, and that changes today. The system will no longer protect officers who abuse their power. Not on my watch. Not anymore." Meanwhile, at the FBI field office, Special Agent in charge Rebecca Morrison was reviewing the initial reports of the incident. She'd already received calls from headquarters in Washington. This was going to be a federal case: civil rights violations, deprivation of rights under color of law, potentially assault with a deadly weapon. "We're going to need to take lead on this," she told her team. "One of our own was targeted. We can't let this slide." But Ethan, at home now with Maya, was thinking about more than just legal consequences. As his daughter showed him her drawings from school, chattering about her day with the innocence of childhood, he thought about the world she was growing up in. A world where her father, despite all his achievements and service, could still be seen as a threat simply because of his skin color. "Daddy, why are you sad?" Maya asked her 7-year-old intuition, picking up on his mood despite his efforts to hide it. "I'm not sad, baby," he said, pulling her close. "Just thinking about grown-up stuff." "Is it about your work? Did you catch bad guys today?" He thought about how to answer that. In a way, he supposed a bad guy had been caught today. Just not the kind she was thinking of. "Something like that," he said. "But everything's okay now. What do you want for dinner?" "Spaghetti," she exclaimed, the incident in the grocery store already forgotten, in favor of her favorite meal. As Ethan cooked dinner, his phone continued to buzz with calls and texts. The story was going national. CNN wanted an interview. The NAACP was issuing a statement. The FBI director himself had called to check on him. But all of that could wait. Tonight he was just a father making spaghetti for his daughter, grateful to be alive to do so. Tomorrow, he would deal with the aftermath. Tomorrow, he would become a symbol in a larger fight. But tonight, he just wanted to be Ethan Cole Dad. The water boiled on the stove, steam rising and fogging the kitchen window. Through the condensation, he could see the lights of his neighborhood, peaceful and suburban, hiding the tensions that had nearly exploded today. Somewhere out there, Ryan Keller was learning that actions have consequences. Somewhere, Chief Doyle was trying to salvage his department's reputation. Somewhere, Margaret Chen's video was being watched by another 1,000 people, sparking another 1,000 conversations about race and policing in America. But in this kitchen, in this moment, there was just a father and daughter cooking dinner together, safe for now in their small bubble of normalcy. The storm would come tomorrow. Tonight, there was spaghetti and homework to check and bedtime stories to read. As Maya set the table, carefully placing 2 plates and 2 sets of silverware, she looked up at her father with those bright, innocent eyes and said, "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, baby," Ethan replied, and meant it more than ever. Because today had reminded him how quickly love could turn to loss, how a simple trip to the store could become a last goodbye. The spaghetti was ready. They sat down to eat, said grace. Maya insisted on it, having learned it from her grandmother, and for a brief, precious moment, the outside world ceased to exist. There was just this, a father, a daughter, and the simple grace of an ordinary dinner that had almost never happened. Tomorrow would bring investigations and interviews, protests and politics. Tomorrow the name Ryan Keller would become synonymous with police brutality and racial profiling. Tomorrow, the Maple Grove Police Department would face scrutiny unlike anything in its history. Tomorrow, the conversation about policing in America would gain another chapter, another example, another tragedy narrowly avoided. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, there was spaghetti and a 7-year-old's laughter and the profound relief of survival. Tonight, Ethan Cole was not a symbol or a statistic. He was just a man who'd gone to buy cereal and had come home to his daughter. The fact that this was remarkable, that it was newsworthy, that it required intervention from a police chief to prevent tragedy, that was the real story. That was what would need to change. That was what the thousands of people now watching Margaret Chen's video were beginning to understand. In the grocery store, now closed for the evening, the cereal aisle stood empty under the fluorescent lights. The box of Honey Nut cereal that had started it all had been purchased, taken home, and would be eaten tomorrow morning. But the space where it had happened, where Ryan Keller had drawn his gun and Ethan Cole had stood his ground, seemed to hold an echo of the day's events. Security footage would later show that the entire confrontation had lasted exactly 11 minutes and 37 seconds. 11 minutes that would change lives, end careers, and spark a movement. 11 minutes that would be analyzed, dissected, and debated for months to come. But for now, as night fell over Maple Grove, there was an uneasy quiet. The storm was gathering, but it hadn't broken yet. In homes across the community, people were watching the news, seeing their local grocery store on national television, hearing their town's name spoken by anchors in New York and Los Angeles. Some were ashamed. Some were angry. Some were proud of Chief Doyle's swift action. But all of them knew that something had fundamentally changed. The comfortable illusion that their community was beyond such problems had been shattered. The mirror had been held up, and they didn't like what they saw. The next morning arrived with a fury that Ethan had anticipated but hoped to avoid. His phone had been ringing since 5 a.m., the screen lighting up with numbers from area codes across the country. Maya was still asleep, curled up in her bed, with her stuffed elephant blissfully unaware that her father's face was now plastered across every major news outlet in America. Ethan stood at his kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching 3 news vans set up camp across the street from his house. His neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was already outside in her robe, gesticulating wildly at a reporter who'd apparently knocked on her door asking for comments about the FBI agent who lives next door. He could see her pointing firmly back toward the street, her gray hair bouncing with indignation. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor, Rebecca Morrison. "DOJ wants a conference call at 8. The Attorney General himself will be on the line. This has gone all the way up." The doorbell rang, and Ethan checked the security camera. It was his sister Denise, using her key to let herself in before he could even get to the door. She entered the kitchen carrying a tablet, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Have you seen what they're saying about you online?" she asked without preamble, setting the tablet on the counter. "Some people are calling you a hero for staying calm, but others, Ethan, there are people defending that cop. They're saying you should have just complied immediately, that you were being deliberately difficult." "I expected that," Ethan said quietly, refilling his coffee cup and pouring one for her. "There are always people who think the victim should have done something different. If I'd gotten on the ground, they'd say I was too quick to surrender. If I'd shown my badge faster, they'd say I was throwing my weight around. There's no winning with people who've already decided that cops are always right." Denise scrolled through her tablet, her expression growing darker. "Ryan Keller's father went on some podcast last night. Said his son is being railroaded, that he was just doing his job following his training. Claims you were acting suspicious and aggressive." "Was I aggressive when I was reaching for cereal?" Ethan asked dryly. "Or was it when I calmly tried to identify myself?" Before Denise could respond, Ethan's phone rang. The caller ID showed Chief Doyle's personal number. Ethan answered on speaker. "Ethan, I'm sorry to call so early." Doyle's voice sounded exhausted, like he hadn't slept. "I wanted you to hear this from me first. Keller's lawyer held a press conference an hour ago. They're claiming wrongful termination, saying I violated his due process rights by suspending him without a proper investigation." "You've got to be kidding me," Denise muttered. "There's more," Doyle continued. "They're saying Keller has been receiving death threats, that his family is in hiding. They're trying to paint him as the victim here." Ethan set down his coffee cup, carefully controlling the anger that flared in his chest. "Frank," he pointed a loaded weapon at an unarmed federal agent in a grocery store. "There's video from multiple angles. What possible defense could he have? They're claiming he was following departmental training on dealing with non-compliant subjects. His lawyer is some hotshot from the police union, David Sterling. You know him." Ethan did know him. Sterling had defended half a dozen officers in high-profile brutality cases, and he was good at his job. He knew how to play the media, how to muddy the waters, how to turn clear-cut cases into debates about procedure and protocol. "I need to go, Frank. I have a call with DOJ in 20 minutes. "Ethan, wait. I wanted to ask. The Morrison family called me. Remember the kidnapping case? They want to organize a community support rally for you, tonight at the town square. I think it might be good for people to remember who you really are, what you've done for this community." After ending the call, Ethan found Maya standing in the doorway, still in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Daddy, why are there TV trucks outside?" Denise immediately moved to intercept her niece, but Ethan held up a hand. He'd learned long ago that children could handle truth better than most adults gave them credit for. "Come here, baby," he said, lifting Maya onto his lap. "Remember how Daddy works to catch bad people? Well, yesterday, someone thought Daddy was a bad person, even though he wasn't. It was a mistake, and now people want to talk about it. Why would they think you're bad? You're the best daddy ever." The innocence in her voice nearly broke him. Sometimes people make mistakes because they're scared, or because they don't take time to really see who someone is. They just see what they expect to see. Maya considered this with the seriousness only a 7-year-old could muster. Like when Tommy at school said I couldn't be good at math because I'm a girl. Exactly like that. Ethan said, amazed at how quickly children could grasp complex concepts when given the chance. "And what did we say about that? That Tommy was wrong, and I should show him with my actions, not my words. That's right. And that's what Daddy's going to do. The Department of Justice call was brutal in its efficiency. The Attorney General himself, Marcus Thompson, led the discussion with the kind of surgical precision that had made him legendary in legal circles. The FBI would be conducting a full investigation into potential civil rights violations. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the district was already preparing charges. They wanted Ethan's complete cooperation, his full statement, and his presence at a press conference that afternoon. "We need to send a message," Thompson said through the speakerphone. "No one is above the law, and no one is beneath its protection. Agent Cole, I want you to know that the full weight of the federal government is behind you on this." But even as Ethan participated in the call, taking notes and answering questions, he could hear the commotion growing outside. Through his window, he could see that the 3 news vans had become 7. Protesters were beginning to gather on both sides of the street. Some carried signs reading, "Justice for Agent Cole," while others held, "Support our police" banners. His neighbor, Mr. Kim, was standing on his lawn with a baseball bat, not threatening anyone, but making it clear that he wouldn't tolerate any trouble in the neighborhood. The man had lived through the LA riots in '92 and had no intention of seeing violence on his street. By noon, the crowd had grown so large that the local police had to set up barriers. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same department that had nearly killed Ethan was now protecting his home from the chaos that their officer had created. Ethan's partner, Special Agent Marcus Webb, arrived just after lunch, badging his way through the police line. Marcus was everything Keller probably feared: a 6'4" black man with arms like tree trunks and a face that could stop traffic. But those who knew him understood that beneath the intimidating exterior was one of the sharpest investigative minds in the Bureau. "Brother, this is insane," Marcus said, pulling Ethan into a brief hug. "I've been fielding calls all morning. Every civil rights organization in the country wants to know if you're okay. The president's press secretary mentioned you in the morning briefing." "The president?" Ethan couldn't hide his surprise. "She said, and I quote, 'No American should fear for their life while buying groceries regardless of their race or profession. The president is monitoring the situation closely.'" They were interrupted by the sound of shouting outside. Through the window, they could see that the 2 groups of protesters had moved closer to each other. Someone threw a bottle. Someone else threw a punch. Within seconds, a full brawl had erupted in the middle of the street. The police moved in quickly, but not before several people were injured. Ethan watched in horror as his quiet suburban street turned into a battlefield. This wasn't what he wanted. This wasn't justice, it was chaos. "We need to get you out of here," Marcus said, already on his phone calling for backup. "Rebecca wants you at the field office anyway. We can go out the back, take my car." But Ethan was already moving toward the front door. "No, I'm not running from my own home." He stepped outside and the fighting stopped almost immediately. All eyes turned to him, the man at the center of the storm. Camera phones came out. The news cameras swiveled in his direction. The silence was deafening. "Please," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "This isn't helping anyone. Go home. Let the legal system work. Violence in my name is still violence, and I won't stand for it." An older black woman pushed through the crowd. Ethan recognized her as Mrs. Morrison, the mother whose daughter he'd helped save. "Agent Cole, we're just trying to support you. After everything you've done for this community, and I appreciate that, Mrs. Morrison, but this isn't the way. Please, everyone go home. Channel your energy into something productive. Vote. Volunteer. Make your voices heard in ways that matter." Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse. But one man, a white protester in his 30s, wearing a Blue Lives Matter shirt, stepped forward. "You happy now?" he spat. "You've turned this whole town against each other. Keller was just doing his job, and you had to make it about race." Before Ethan could respond, Mr. Kim stepped between them. "You get off this street now," the elderly Korean man said firmly. This man saved my grandson when he was caught up with drug dealers. What has Keller ever done except wave a gun at innocent people? The confrontation might have escalated, but the police quickly moved in, escorting the aggressive protester away. Ethan nodded his thanks to Mr. Kim, then went back inside. His hands were shaking not from fear, but from the effort of remaining calm when every instinct screamed at him to defend himself more forcefully. The press conference that afternoon was held at the federal building downtown. Ethan stood beside the U.S. Attorney Patricia Hawkins as she announced that the Department of Justice was filing federal civil rights charges against Ryan Keller. The room was packed with reporters, their questions coming fast and sharp. Agent Cole, do you believe Officer Keller's actions were racially motivated? Agent Cole, have you experienced similar incidents before? Agent Cole, what would you say to those who argue you should have simply complied? Ethan answered carefully, professionally, sticking to facts rather than emotions. But one question stopped him cold. Agent Cole. A young reporter asked, your daughter is 7 years old. How do you explain to her that someone wanted to kill her father for buying cereal? The room went quiet. Ethan could feel every eye on him waiting. He thought of Maya that morning, trying to understand why anyone would think her daddy was bad. I tell her the truth, he said finally. That sometimes fear makes people do terrible things. That sometimes people see danger where none exists because they've been taught to be afraid of people who look different. And I tell her that it's our job, all of our jobs, to be better than our fears. Meanwhile, across town, Ryan Keller sat in his lawyer's office watching the press conference on television. David Sterling paced behind him, already crafting their counter-narrative. They're making you out to be a monster, Sterling said. But we're going to show them that you're just a young officer who made a split-second decision in a potentially dangerous situation. We'll focus on your training, your exemplary academy record, your volunteer work with youth sports. Keller barely heard him. He was watching Ethan on the screen, seeing the dignity with which he carried himself, the careful way he chose his words. For the first time since the incident, Keller felt something pierce through his defensiveness doubt. He really is FBI, Keller said quietly. That doesn't matter, Sterling replied sharply. You didn't know that at the time. You responded to what you perceived as a threat based on your training and experience. But what experience? I'd never seen him before. I just thought... Keller trailed off. You thought what? Sterling pressed. Keller couldn't say it out loud, couldn't admit that he'd seen a black man in nice clothes, and immediately assumed criminal activity. That he'd created an entire narrative in his head, based on nothing but skin color and his own fears. His phone buzzed with a text from his girlfriend Sarah. I'm sorry, Ryan, but I can't do this. The man in that video isn't who I thought you were. Don't contact me again. Another piece of his life crumbling away. He'd already been kicked out of his apartment after the landlord started receiving threats. His parents were staying in a hotel 2 towns over. His brother, a Marine stationed in California, had called him a disgrace to the uniform, any uniform. Back at the federal building, Rebecca Morrison was briefing Ethan on the investigation's progress. We've pulled Keller's entire history, social media, academy records, previous complaints. There's a pattern here, Ethan. 3 other incidents in his 4 months on the force, all involving black or Hispanic men, all escalated beyond what was necessary. Why wasn't he flagged? Ethan asked. Because he never quite crossed the line before. Aggressive stops, unnecessary force, but always just within what could be defended as acceptable. Until yesterday. So I was just the one where he finally went too far. Rebecca nodded grimly. The grocery store's security footage is damning. We've got him following you from the parking lot, watching you for a full 5 minutes before approaching. There was no call, no report, no probable cause. He created the entire situation. That evening, the community rally went ahead, despite Ethan's absence. He'd decided not to attend, worried his presence might inflame tensions further. Instead, he watched from his living room as hundreds of people gathered in the town square holding candles and singing hymns. Chief Doyle spoke, his voice heavy with regret and determination. We failed, Agent Cole. We failed our community. But we will not fail again. Starting tomorrow, every officer in this department will undergo intensive retraining. We're implementing new oversight measures, and we're going to earn back your trust one day at a time." The crowd's response was mixed. Some applauded, others remained skeptical. Trust once broken wasn't easily repaired. Later that night, after Maya was asleep, Ethan sat in his home office writing his official statement for the FBI investigation. Every detail had to be documented, every moment recalled with precision. As he typed, he found himself thinking about all the times before when he'd been stopped, questioned, treated as suspicious simply for existing while black. The time in college when campus security had detained him for matching the description of a burglar. The description being black male, medium build. The time he'd been pulled over 3 times in 1 week after buying his Charger, each officer claiming he was driving aggressively when he'd been doing exactly the speed limit. The countless times he'd been followed in stores, watched by security, treated as a threat, until he showed his badge. He'd never reported those incidents, never made them official. He'd swallowed his anger and moved on, telling himself it was the price of living in America while black. But now, with everything in the open, he wondered if his silence had been complicity. If by not speaking up, he'd allowed officers like Keller to believe their behavior was acceptable. His phone rang, his personal line, not his bureau phone. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Hello? Agent Cole?" The voice was young, nervous. This is Ryan Keller." Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. "Mr. Keller, I don't think we should be speaking. You should go through your attorney." "I know, I needed to say something. Not for the case or for the media or anything like that. Just person to person." "I'm listening." There was a long pause. Ethan could hear Keller breathing, struggling with words. "I was scared," Keller finally said. "Not of you specifically, just scared. Of failing, of not being tough enough, of not living up to what I thought a cop should be. And that fear made me see things that weren't there, made me create a threat where none existed." "Mr. Keller, I know this doesn't fix anything. I know I can't undo what I did. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. What I did was wrong. Not just procedurally or legally, but morally. I let my prejudices nearly cost you your life, and I'm going to have to live with that forever." "What do you want from me?" Ethan asked quietly. "Nothing. I don't deserve anything from you. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not sorry I got caught, but sorry for what I did. Sorry for what I put you through. Sorry for what I put your daughter through." The mention of Maya sparked anger in Ethan's chest. "You pointed a loaded weapon at me in a grocery store. Do you understand that my 7-year-old daughter could have been an orphan right now?" "Yes." Keller's voice was barely a whisper. "I understand." "No, I don't think you do. I don't think you can. Because you've never had to have the conversation with your child about how to survive an encounter with the police. You've never had to teach your kid to keep their hands visible, to move slowly, to be overly polite, even when they've done nothing wrong. You've never had to explain why Daddy might not come home one day, not because of the dangerous criminals he faces at work, but because of a scared cop at a traffic stop." Keller was crying now. Ethan could hear it in his breathing. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." "Your apology doesn't change anything," Ethan said. "It doesn't erase the trauma, doesn't fix the system that created you, doesn't prevent the next Ryan Keller from doing the same thing or worse." "Then what can I do?" Ethan thought for a long moment. "You can tell the truth. In court, in public, everywhere. You can admit what really happened and why. You can stop letting your lawyer spin this as a misunderstanding or a procedural error. You can own your prejudice and maybe, just maybe, help other officers recognize theirs before someone dies. Sterling will drop me as a client if I do that. Then you have a choice to make: your career or your conscience." The line went quiet again. Then, "Thank you for taking my call, Agent Cole. And, for what it's worth, I think you would have made a great training officer. The way you stayed calm, tried to de-escalate. I could have learned a lot from you. You could have learned that from any decent officer, Mr. Keller. The problem is you didn't want to learn. You wanted to be the hero in your own action movie, and you cast me as the villain before I even opened my mouth." After ending the call, Ethan sat in the darkness of his office processing the conversation. He didn't know if Keller's remorse was genuine or just another attempt at damage control. But something in the young man's voice had sounded different from the defiance he'd shown in the store. The next morning brought fresh chaos. Someone had leaked a partial recording of Keller's training videos from the police academy showing him during a simulated traffic stop where he'd been criticized for being too soft and not establishing command presence. His training officer could be heard saying, "Out there hesitation kills. Better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. The video went viral within hours, sparking debates about police training methodology. Were officers being taught to be warriors when they should be guardians? Were they being programmed to see threats everywhere to shoot first and ask questions later? Chief Doyle held another press conference announcing a complete overhaul of the department's training program. "We've been teaching our officers to be soldiers in an imaginary war," he said. "It's time we taught them to be members of the community they serve." But the damage was spreading beyond Maple Grove. In cities across the country, protesters were using Ethan's near-death experience as a rallying cry. "Not even a federal agent is safe," they chanted. "If it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone." The protests outside the courthouse 3 weeks later had swelled to thousands. Ethan watched from the federal prosecutor's office window as the crowd divided itself like oil and water supporters of police reform on one side, thin blue line defenders on the other. Between them stood riot police irony, apparently lost on everyone involved. Patricia Hawkins, the U.S. attorney, turned from her desk where she'd been reviewing grand jury transcripts. "Ethan, I need to prepare you for something. Keller's lawyer filed a motion this morning. They're arguing you provoked the confrontation by refusing to comply immediately." Provoked? Ethan's voice remained level, but Marcus, standing beside him, could see the tension in his partner's jaw. "I was buying cereal." "I know. But Sterling is good at what he does. He's going to try to make this about procedure, about officer safety, about split-second decisions. He'll paint you as an uncooperative subject who happened to be FBI." The door opened and Rebecca Morrison entered, her face grim. "We have a problem. Someone leaked Keller's personnel file to the media. Everything, his psychological evaluations, his social media history, that we subpoenaed, even comments he made during academy training." She handed Ethan a tablet showing a local news website. The headline read, "Keller called black neighborhoods war zones in Academy essay." The article detailed a paper Keller had written about policing strategies filled with language that painted predominantly black communities as inherently dangerous, their residents as potential combatants. "This is going to make everything worse," Patricia said. "Sterling will claim we're poisoning the jury pool, that Keller can't get a fair trial." "Maybe he shouldn't get a fair trial," Marcus muttered. "How many fair trials do black men get when cops shoot them?" Before anyone could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was Denise texting frantically. "Maya's school is on lockdown. Someone called in a threat. They're evacuating." Ethan was out the door before anyone could speak, Marcus right behind him. They took the stairs 3 at a time, badges out to clear their path through security. The 20-minute drive to Maya's school took them 12 sirens blaring, Ethan's hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. The school was surrounded by police cars when they arrived. Parents clustered behind yellow tape, some crying, others shouting at officers for information. Ethan badged his way through, found the principal, Mrs. Hartford, standing with a police lieutenant. "Where is she? Where's Maya?" "Agent Cole. All the children are safe. We evacuated to the community center as a precaution. The threat mentioned your daughter specifically." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Someone had threatened his 7-year-old daughter because of this case. Marcus grabbed his arm before he could respond, grounding him. "What exactly did the threat say?" Marcus asked, his professional tone masking his own fury. The lieutenant, a young woman named Rodriguez, consulted her notebook. The caller said, "If Cole doesn't drop the charges, his daughter won't be safe at school. We're treating it as a federal crime threatening a federal agent's family." Ethan found Maya at the community center, sitting with her class, her teacher reading them a story to keep them calm. She ran to him when she saw him, and he held her so tight she complained she couldn't breathe. "Daddy, why did we have to leave school?" Mrs. Jenkins said it was a drill, but it didn't feel like a drill. He looked into her innocent eyes and made a decision. "Someone said something mean to try to scare us. But you know what? We don't let mean people win, do we?" "No," Maya said firmly. "We stand up to bullies." "That's right, baby. That's exactly right." That evening, Ethan's house became a fortress. Federal agents were posted outside. Marcus insisted on staying in the guest room. Denise arrived with enough groceries to feed an army, channeling her anxiety into cooking. While Maya did homework at the kitchen table, supervised by her aunt, Ethan and Marcus sat in the living room, reviewing security footage from the grocery store for the 100th time. They'd memorized every frame, every second of those 11 minutes and 37 seconds. "Look at this," Marcus said, pausing the video. "Right here, when you're reaching for the cereal." Keller's hand goes to his weapon before he even announces himself. He'd already decided you were a threat. "The question is why," Ethan said. "What made him look at me and see danger?" They both knew the answer, but the legal system required more than obvious truths. It required evidence documentation, a paper trail that proved what every black person in America already knew. The doorbell rang, causing everyone to freeze. Marcus had his hand on his weapon as he checked the security monitor. "It's Chief Doyle." Ethan opened the door to find Doyle looking haggard, aged 10 years and 3 weeks. "Ethan, I'm sorry to bother you at home. Can we talk?" They sat on the front porch, the federal agents watching from their vehicles. Doyle stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "I fired 3 more officers today. The investigation into Keller opened up a whole can of worms. Complaints that were buried, reports that were altered, a whole culture of looking the other way." He paused, his voice heavy with shame. "I thought I was running a clean department. I was wrong." "What do you want from me, Frank?" "I want you to know that I'm testifying, for the prosecution, against one of my own officers, former officer. Some people are calling me a traitor, saying I'm throwing Keller under the bus to save my own career. Are you?" Doyle looked him in the eye. "Maybe partly. But mostly I keep thinking about what almost happened in that store. I keep thinking about your daughter almost losing her father over cereal. And I know that if I don't stand up now, if I don't say this was wrong, then I'm complicit in the next time it happens." From inside the house, they could hear Maya laughing at something Denise said. The sound was jarring against the weight of their conversation. "The union is pulling their support from the department," Doyle continued. "Sterling convinced them that I violated Keller's rights. They're talking about a vote of no confidence." "You could have stayed quiet," Ethan observed. "Could have let the investigation run its course without taking a stand." Could I look at myself in the mirror, knowing I stayed silent? Could I face my own kids?" Doyle stood to leave, then turned back. "For what it's worth, Ethan, I'm sorry. Not just for what Keller did, but for every time one of my officers made someone feel like you felt in that store. For every time we failed to serve and protect everyone equally." After Doyle left, Ethan found himself standing in Maya's doorway watching her sleep. She'd insisted on leaving her door open, scared by the day's events, even if she didn't fully understand them. Her small hand clutched the stuffed elephant, her face peaceful in sleep. His phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. When he opened it, his blood ran cold. It was a photo of Maya's school, taken from across the street. The message read, "Drop the charges, or next time won't be just a threat." Marcus was beside him in seconds, already calling for a trace on the number. Within minutes, their house was buzzing with federal agents. The cybercrimes unit was pulled in. Maya miraculously slept through it all. "We're moving you to a safe house," Rebecca said, arriving within the hour. "This is escalation we can't ignore." "No," Ethan said firmly. "We run. Now we'll be running forever." And what message does that send? That threatening a federal agent's family works. Ethan, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. Increase security. Yes. Investigate the threat, absolutely. But I'm not leaving my home. Maya's not leaving her school. We don't let terrorists win, whether they're foreign or domestic. The next morning, the threat was headline news. Someone in the bureau had leaked it, probably hoping public outrage would provide protection. It worked to a degree. Maya's school was flooded with supportive parents volunteering to stand guard. Veterans from Harold Brennan's VFW post set up a rotation, ensuring someone was always watching the school perimeter. But it also emboldened the other side. Counter-protesters appeared at the school claiming Ethan was using his daughter for sympathy, that he was the real threat to law and order. The scene grew so heated that classes had to be moved to online learning for the rest of the week. In his apartment across town, Ryan Keller watched the chaos he'd created spiral further out of control. His lawyer Sterling had forbidden him from any public statements, but Keller couldn't stop himself from obsessively following every development. He saw the footage of protesters at Maya's school and felt sick. Whatever he'd told himself about that day in the grocery store, he'd never intended for a child to be threatened. He thought about his own nephew, about how he'd feel if someone threatened him. His phone rang. Sterling. "Good news," the lawyer said without preamble. "The threat against the kid is going to work in our favor. Shows how heated this has become, how impossible it is for you to get a fair trial. I'm filing for a change of venue, maybe even getting the federal charges dismissed." "A little girl was threatened because of what I did," Keller said quietly. "What you allegedly did. And that's not your fault. You can't control what extremists do. But they're doing it because of me, because they think I'm some kind of hero standing up against what a father buying groceries. Ryan, you need to stop this line of thinking. You're my client, and my job is to defend you. Your job is to let me." After hanging up, Keller sat in his empty apartment surrounded by packed boxes. He was moving back in with his parents, couldn't afford rent anymore. His savings were gone, spent on legal fees. His future in law enforcement was over, regardless of the trial's outcome. He picked up his phone again, scrolled to a number he'd saved, but never called. Officer Patricia Williams, the black officer from Doyle's department, who'd spoken up at that meeting. Before he could lose his nerve, he pressed call. "Officer Williams, this is Ryan Keller. Please don't hang up. I need to understand something." There was a long pause. "What could you possibly need from me?" "You were right. At that meeting, when you said it was about culture, not just training, I need to understand how I became someone who could do what I did. How I became the kind of cop that other cops defend, even when I'm clearly wrong." "You want me to educate you after everything?" "No, I want to take responsibility. Really take it, not just say the words my lawyer gives me. But I don't know how. I don't know how to fix what I broke." Williams was quiet for so long, Keller thought she'd hung up. Then, "You can't fix it. You can't undo pointing a gun at an innocent man. You can't unthreaten his life. But maybe you can prevent the next version of you from doing the same thing." "How?" "Tell the truth, the whole truth. Not the version that makes you look better, not the story your lawyer wants you to tell. The ugly truth about what you were thinking, what you were feeling, what fears and prejudices drove you. Make it impossible for people to pretend this was about anything other than race." "My lawyer will fire me." "Then get a new lawyer. Or better yet, plead guilty and allocute. Stand up in court and tell everyone exactly what happened and why. Make it so clear that no one can spin it, excuse it, or explain it away. That would mean prison time." You pointed a loaded gun at an innocent federal agent. You should go to prison. The question is whether you'll go as someone who owned their actions or as someone who let lawyers turn them into a victim. That afternoon, the grand jury returned an indictment. Keller was formally charged with 3 federal crimes: deprivation of rights under color of law assault with a deadly weapon on a federal officer and making false statements to investigators, the last charge stemming from his initial claim that there had been reports of suspicious activity. The courthouse steps became a battlefield of perspectives as Patricia Hawkins announced the charges. Ethan stood beside her, steady and professional, even as protesters screamed both support and condemnation from behind police barriers. "Justice isn't revenge," Patricia said into the microphones. "It's accountability. Officer Keller will have his day in court, will be presumed innocent until proven guilty. But no badge grants immunity from the law it's meant to uphold." That evening, something unexpected happened. As Ethan was reading Maya her bedtime story, his phone rang with a number he recognized: David Sterling, Keller's attorney. "Agent Cole, I'm calling to inform you that I'm withdrawing as Mr. Keller's counsel. He's indicated he wishes to take a different approach to his defense. I thought you should hear it from me." After Sterling hung up, Ethan sat processing this development. Was Keller going to fight harder or finally take responsibility? The uncertainty gnawed at him. 3 days later, he got his answer. Keller appeared at a hastily called press conference with a new attorney, not a criminal defense lawyer, but a civil rights attorney named Jennifer Kim, who typically represented victims of police brutality. Keller looked different. The cocky young officer was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to have aged years in weeks. He approached the microphones with shaking hands and began to read from a prepared statement. 3 weeks ago, I pointed my service weapon at Special Agent Ethan Cole while he was shopping for groceries. I did this not because he posed any threat, not because I had any legitimate reason to suspect him of a crime, but because I saw a black man in a nice car and expensive clothes and assumed he must be a criminal. The crowd outside the courthouse went silent. Even the protesters stopped chanting. I created a dangerous situation out of nothing but my own prejudices and fears. I escalated that situation because I'd been trained to see myself as a warrior in enemy territory, rather than a guardian of the community. I nearly killed an innocent man, a father, a decorated federal agent, who has done more to protect this community than I ever did. Reporters were frantically typing, broadcasting live. This was unprecedented, a police officer admitting not just to a mistake, but to racial profiling, to prejudice, to the systemic issues everyone knew existed, but few admitted. I'm pleading guilty to all charges. Keller continued, his voice stronger now. I'm waiving my right to a trial because there's nothing to dispute. What I did was wrong legally, morally, fundamentally wrong. And I did it while wearing a badge that represents the public trust, which makes it even worse. Someone shouted from the crowd, "They're making you say this." Keller looked toward the voice. No one is making me say anything. For the first time since this happened, I'm telling the complete truth. I was a racist with a badge and a gun, and Agent Cole nearly paid with his life for my prejudice. The admission sent shockwaves through every corner of the debate. Police union representatives denounced Keller as a traitor. Reform advocates held him up as an example of accountability. Legal experts debated whether his confession was genuine or calculated. In his home watching on television, while Maya played in the next room, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected, a small measure of relief. Not forgiveness that would take time if it came at all, but relief that finally someone was saying the truth out loud, without equivocation or excuse. His phone rang. It was Chief Doyle. "Did you know he was going to do that?" Doyle asked. "No. I'm as surprised as you are." "It changes things. The union is in chaos. Half want to disown him completely, the other half think he was coerced. The department is split down the middle." "Maybe that's what needs to happen," Ethan said. "Maybe things need to break completely before they can be rebuilt properly." That night, as Ethan tucked Maya into bed, she asked him a question that stopped him cold. Daddy is the scared policeman going to jail. He sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. Probably baby. When people do wrong things, there have to be consequences. But he said sorry. Doesn't that count? Saying sorry is important, but it doesn't erase what someone did. If you broke someone's toy, would saying sorry fix the toy? Maya thought about this with her characteristic intensity. No. I'd have to get them a new toy, or fix the broken one. That's right. And some things can't be fixed or replaced. So the person has to face consequences for what they broke. What did he break? Ethan struggled with how to explain trust safety, the social contract that was supposed to exist between police and citizens. Finally, he said, he broke the rules that keep people safe, and when police break those rules, everyone becomes less safe. Maya nodded solemnly, then hugged him tight. I'm glad you're safe, Daddy. Me too, baby. Me too. As he left her room, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Check the news, now. He turned on the television to find breaking news. 3 more officers from departments across the country had come forward, admitting to racial profiling, to excessive force, to the kind of behavior that had been denied and excused for decades. They all cited Keller's confession as their inspiration. It's starting, the news anchor said. What some are calling the Keller effect, officers breaking ranks to admit to systemic problems within policing. The movement was small, just a handful of voices in a system of hundreds of thousands. But it was something, a crack in the blue wall of silence. Standing in his living room watching history unfold in real time, Ethan thought about that moment in the grocery store when Keller's finger had hovered over the trigger. How close he'd come to becoming another statistic, another hashtag, another name chanted at protests. Instead, he was alive to witness something he'd never thought he'd see: the system beginning to acknowledge its own failures, one confession at a time. The sentencing hearing was set for a Thursday morning in October, 6 months after the grocery store incident. The courthouse had been transformed into a fortress with metal barriers, creating a pathway through the sea of protesters, media, and observers who'd arrived before dawn to claim their spots. Ethan sat in his car for a moment, watching the circus that his life had become, before Maya's voice from the back seat pulled him back. Daddy, why are all these people here? He'd made the controversial decision to bring her despite Denise's objections. But Maya had been asking questions, having nightmares, creating her own narratives about what happened. He believed she needed to see the conclusion to understand that the system, however flawed, was trying to work. They're here because what happened to us matters to them, he said, turning to look at his daughter. She was dressed in her best outfit, the one she wore to church with her grandmother, her hair carefully braided by Denise that morning. Does it hurt what happened? Maya asked with the startling directness children possessed. Yes, baby, it hurts, but sometimes hurt can lead to healing if we handle it right. They entered through a side entrance, escorted by Marcus and a team of federal marshals. The courtroom was already packed, every seat taken, overflow rooms, set up with video feeds. Ethan recognized faces from the past 6 months. Mrs. Morrison, Harold Brennan, Officer Patricia Williams, even Margaret Chen, the store employee whose video had started everything. Ryan Keller was already seated at the defense table with Jennifer Kim. He looked gaunt, having lost probably 20 pounds. His parents sat behind him, his mother clutching a rosary, his father staring straight ahead with the 1,000-yard stare of a man watching his son's life collapse. Judge Catherine Reeves, a 60-year-old African-American woman with a reputation for fairness and intolerance of theatrics, called the court to order. The room fell silent. Mr. Keller, you've pled guilty to all charges. Before I impose sentence, you have the right to address the court. Do you wish to speak? Keller stood slowly, his legs seemingly unsteady. He turned not toward the judge but toward Ethan, who sat in the first row of the gallery with Maya on his lap. Agent Cole. He began, his voice rough. I've started this speech 100 times in my head, and each time the words feel inadequate. There's no combination of syllables that can undo what I did. No apology profound enough to erase the image of my gun pointed at you while you reached for cereal. He paused, swallowing hard. But I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the fear I caused you, for the trauma I inflicted on your daughter, for the chaos my actions brought to your life. I'm sorry for every black man who's been in your position but didn't have your credentials to protect them, your chief, to intervene, your cameras to record the truth. Keller's mother sobbed quietly. His father's jaw clenched tighter. I've spent these months in therapy, trying to understand how I became someone capable of what I did. The easy answer would be bad training, systemic issues, fear-based policing culture. And all of that's true. But the harder answer, the one I have to own, is that I was racist. Not the kind who uses slurs or burns crosses, but the kind who sees a successful black man and assumes criminality. The kind who's been taught to fear what they don't understand and given a gun to enforce that fear. Patricia Williams, sitting 3 rows back, wiped a tear from her eye. She'd spent 20 years hoping to hear a white officer say these words out loud, in court on record. Your daughter asked you once why anyone would think her daddy was bad. Keller continued, and now he looked directly at Maya. The answer, sweetheart, is that I was taught to be afraid of people who look like your daddy. I was wrong. Your daddy is a hero, and I'm the one who was dangerous that day. Maya pressed closer to Ethan, who held her tight, feeling her small body trembling slightly. I'm going to prison, Keller said, addressing the room now. I should go to prison, but I want everyone to understand that I'm not a victim. I'm not a scapegoat. I'm not a good cop who made a mistake. I'm a racist who nearly committed murder because a black man reached for cereal in a grocery store. And if you're defending me, if you're making excuses for me, if you're saying I was just doing my job, then you're part of the problem that nearly killed Agent Cole. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the protesters outside had gone quiet, watching on their phones as the feed streamed live. Judge Reeves nodded slowly. Mr. Cole, as the victim in this case, you have the right to make a statement before sentencing. Do you wish to speak? Ethan stood, passing Maya to Denise, and walked to the podium. He'd written and rewritten his statement dozens of times, but now facing the room he spoke from his heart. Your Honor, 6 months ago, I went to buy groceries. It was supposed to take 20 minutes. Instead, it changed my life, my daughter's life, and apparently the life of the man who pointed a gun at me. He looked at Keller. I've been in law enforcement for 15 years. I've faced drug dealers, human traffickers, and terrorists. But the moment that scared me most was standing in that cereal aisle, watching a young officer's fear and prejudice override his training and humanity. Ethan turned to address the gallery. Some people want me to forgive Officer Keller. Others want me to demand the maximum sentence. But what I want is change. Real, systemic, lasting change. Because tomorrow, another black father will go to buy groceries. Another Latino teenager will walk home from school. Another Asian grandmother will go for her morning walk. And they should be able to do so without wondering if today is the day their skin color becomes a death sentence. He paused, his voice growing stronger. Mr. Keller's confession is a start. His acknowledgement of his racism, his acceptance of responsibility, these matter. But they're not enough. Because for every Ryan Keller who admits the truth, there are 100 more who hide behind badges and qualified immunity and the thin blue line. Chief Doyle, sitting in uniform in the 3rd row, nodded almost imperceptibly. Your Honor, I'm not asking for vengeance. I'm asking for justice. And justice means consequences for actions, but it also means preventing future harm. Mr. Keller should go to prison, not just as punishment, but as a message that badges don't grant immunity from basic human decency. But he should also, if he's sincere about change, use his voice to help dismantle the system that created him. Ethan returned to his seat, and Maya immediately climbed back into his lap, whispering, "Good job, Daddy." Judge Reeves called a brief recess before sentencing. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. Reporters typed furiously on phones and laptops. Outside, the crowd had swelled even larger, with some calling for Keller's head, and others holding signs saying, "Redemption is possible." When court resumed, Judge Reeves's expression was grave. "Mr. Keller, please rise." Keller stood Jennifer Kim beside him. "Mr. Keller, your actions on April 3rd were not just criminal, but a betrayal of public trust. You weaponized your badge and your prejudices, creating danger where none existed. The fact that Agent Cole survived is not a mitigating factor, it's pure fortune." She paused, looking over her glasses at him. "However, the court must also consider your acceptance of responsibility, your guilty plea saving the government, and victims the trauma of trial, and most importantly, your unequivocal acknowledgement of the racial animus that motivated your actions. This kind of honesty is rare in these cases, and while it doesn't excuse your crimes, it does factor into sentencing." The room held its breath. "On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, I sentence you to 3 years in federal prison. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon on a federal officer, I sentence you to 4 years in federal prison. On the charge of making false statements, I sentence you to 1 year in federal prison." Gasps rippled through the room. 8 years total. "However," Judge Reeves continued, "these sentences will run concurrently, not consecutively. Additionally, I'm recommending you serve your time at a minimum security facility with access to educational and vocational programs. Upon release, you'll have 3 years of supervised probation and 500 hours of community service, specifically working with organizations focused on police reform and racial justice." She looked directly at Keller. "Mr. Keller, you have a choice. You can serve your time bitter and resentful, or you can use it to become the person you claim you want to be. You can be an example of accountability or another cautionary tale. That's up to you." "Furthermore," the judge continued, "this court orders the Maple Grove Police Department to undergo federal monitoring for the next 5 years, with quarterly reports on hiring practices, training procedures, and complaint resolutions. Chief Doyle, I expect full cooperation." Doyle stood. "You'll have it, Your Honor." As the marshals prepared to take Keller into custody, he turned once more to Ethan. "I'll write to you if that's okay. Not for forgiveness, just to let you know I'm trying to earn the second chance the judge just gave me." Ethan nodded slightly, a gesture that wasn't forgiveness, but wasn't rejection either. The courtroom began to empty, but the story was far from over. Outside, the reaction was explosive. Some felt 4 years' actual time was too lenient for attempted murder. Others saw it as excessive for a crime where no shots were fired. The debate raged on cable news, social media, and dinner tables across America. That evening, back at Ethan's house, a small gathering formed organically. Harold Brennan arrived with his wife bringing a casserole. The Morrisons came with their daughter, who played with Maya in the backyard. Officer Patricia Williams stopped by off-duty out of uniform just to check in. As they sat on the back porch watching the children play, Williams said, "4 officers from my department resigned today, rather than undergo the new training requirements. Said they wouldn't be indoctrinated." "Good riddance," Harold said bluntly. "If training officers not to point guns at innocent people is indoctrination, then they shouldn't be cops." "It's bigger than that," Williams continued. "Departments across the country are implementing similar reforms. They're calling it the Cole Standard, emphasizing de-escalation, requiring body cameras, and mandatory reporting of all weapon draws, not just discharges." Ethan watched Maya pushing the Morrison girl on the swing, their laughter carrying across the yard. "I never wanted to be a symbol," he said quietly. "I just wanted to buy cereal." "Nobody chooses to be a symbol," Mrs. Morrison said, her hand finding his shoulder. "Rosa Parks just wanted to ride the bus. But sometimes ordinary people doing ordinary things expose extraordinary injustices." That night, after everyone had left and Maya was asleep, Ethan sat in his home office, staring at a blank computer screen. He'd been asked to write an op-ed for the Washington Post, to put his thoughts about the sentence, about justice, about moving forward into words that millions would read. He began typing. 6 months ago, I almost died buying cereal. Not because of any action I took, but because of assumptions made about me based on my skin color. Today, the man who nearly killed me was sentenced to prison. Some call this justice. Others call it insufficient. I call it a beginning. He wrote about Maya, about explaining to a 7-year-old why someone wanted to hurt her daddy. He wrote about the other victims who didn't survive their encounters, who couldn't stand in court and demand change. He wrote about Chief Doyle, who chose accountability over the comfortable silence of the blue wall. But mostly, he wrote about tomorrow. About the next black father buying groceries, the next Latino teenager walking home, the next Asian grandmother on her morning walk. About the world he wanted Maya to grow up in, where her father's badge wouldn't be the only thing standing between him and a nervous officer's bullet. As he typed, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize from a federal facility in Pennsylvania. Agent Cole. This is Warden Mitchell at FCI Morgantown. Mr. Keller has requested to be placed in our restorative justice program. It involves facilitated dialogues between offenders and victims or victim representatives. I'm calling to see if you'd be interested in participating. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Can I think about it? Of course. This would be months down the road anyway, but I wanted you to know the option exists. After hanging up, Ethan stood at Maya's door watching her sleep. She'd been having fewer nightmares lately, but sometimes she still asked if the scared policeman was going to come back. He thought about the warden's call about the possibility of sitting across from Ryan Keller, not in a courtroom, but in a room designed for healing. Could he do it? More importantly, should he? His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Turn on CNN. The breaking news banner read, 3 more cities announce police reform measures following Cole case. The anchor was interviewing a panel of experts about the unprecedented wave of voluntary reforms being implemented by departments trying to avoid federal oversight. One panelist, a former police chief himself, said, "What we're seeing is departments finally acknowledging what communities of color have been saying for decades. The Cole case wasn't unique, it was uniquely documented. Every department knows they have officers like Keller. The question is whether they'll address it proactively or wait for their own grocery store incident." Ethan turned off the television. Change was happening slowly, incrementally, but it was happening. 4 years in prison for Keller. Federal oversight for Maple Grove. Reforms spreading across the country. It wasn't everything, but it wasn't nothing. He returned to his op-ed, adding a final paragraph. Justice isn't a destination, but a journey. Today we took a step forward. Tomorrow we'll need to take another. And the day after that, another still. Because the price of justice, like the price of freedom, is eternal vigilance. And sometimes it's as simple as being able to buy cereal without fear. He hit send, knowing that by morning his words would be read by millions. Some would agree, others would rage, but all would be forced to confront the reality that in America, a badge and a gun had nearly turned a grocery run into a funeral. In a minimum security prison intake facility, Ryan Keller sat on a thin mattress holding an orientation packet. His cellmate, an older black man named Jerome, serving time for tax evasion, looked at him with curiosity. "You're the cop from the news, the one who confessed." Keller nodded, bracing for anger, maybe violence. Instead, Jerome said, "Takes courage to admit you were wrong. Most people in here won't ever do that. Question is, what you gonna do with that courage now?" Keller thought about Ethan's words in court about using his voice to dismantle the system that created him. "I guess I'm going to try to earn the second chance I've been given." "Well," Jerome said, lying back on his bunk, "you've got 4 years to figure out how. Best get started." Outside, the world continued to turn. Protests continued, though smaller now. Debates raged on about sentence lengths and systemic reform. Politicians positioned themselves on various sides of the issue, looking toward upcoming elections. But in Maple Grove at the supermarket where it all began, something subtle had changed. The cereal aisle was just a cereal aisle again. Customers of all colors reached for boxes, without fear, without suspicion, without the weight of that April afternoon hanging over them. Margaret Chen still worked there, and sometimes she would stand in that spot remembering. She'd kept her phone video saved in multiple places, evidence of a moment that changed lives. Sometimes customers recognized her, thanked her for recording, for uploading, for not staying silent. "I just did what anyone would do," she always said, though she knew that wasn't true. Many people had done nothing, but she had acted, and that action had rippled outward in ways she never could have imagined. As October turned to November, as the leaves fell, and the air grew cold, life in Maple Grove slowly found a new rhythm. The federal monitors arrived, beginning their assessment of the police department. Chief Doyle implemented weekly community forums, forcing officers to face the people they served, to hear their fears and concerns directly. Officer Patricia Williams was promoted to lieutenant, tasked with overseeing the department's new training program. Her first act was to require every officer to spend a shift unarmed, walking the neighborhoods they patrolled, talking to residents not as potential threats, but as human beings. Some officers resigned in protest. Others embraced the changes. Most fell somewhere in between, uncertain but willing to try. Change. Williams knew was never comfortable. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Maple Grove in snow by Thanksgiving. Ethan stood at his kitchen window watching Maya build a snowman in the backyard, with the kind of focus she usually reserved for her homework. 8 months had passed since the grocery store incident, and life had found a strange new normal one, where federal agents still did periodic security sweeps of their house, where Maya knew to look for exits in every building they entered, where a simple trip to buy milk could never again be truly simple. The doorbell rang, and Ethan checked the security monitor before opening it. Patricia Williams stood on his porch now, wearing lieutenant's insignia, snow dusting her shoulders. "Patricia, come in. It's freezing out there." She entered, stomping snow from her boots. "I'm sorry to bother you at home, Ethan, but something's happened that you need to know about." They sat in his living room while Maya continued playing outside, visible through the large window. Patricia pulled out a tablet, her expression troubled. "Ryan Keller was attacked in prison yesterday. He's in the infirmary with a broken jaw and 3 cracked ribs." Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. Who did it? 3 inmates. White supremacists who apparently didn't appreciate his confession. They've been calling him a race traitor, said he betrayed the badge. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, Keller being attacked by the very people whose worldview he'd once unconsciously shared. Ethan stared at the tablet, showing Keller's medical report, conflicted emotions churning through him. "There's more," Patricia continued. "He's been corresponding with a sociology professor at Georgetown, Dr. Angela Foster. She studies police culture and systemic bias. Apparently, Keller reached out to her wanting to understand how he became what he was. She's been visiting him, and they're working on something together, a study about how officers develop racial bias, using his own history as a case study." "Why are you telling me this?" Patricia hesitated. "Because Dr. Foster wants to interview you. She says understanding your perspective, your experience, is crucial to the complete picture. And because Keller asked her to tell you something, that getting beaten didn't change his mind about accepting responsibility. If anything, it reinforced how toxic the culture he was part of really was." Before Ethan could respond, his phone rang. It was Rebecca Morrison from the FBI field office. "Ethan, we have a situation. There's been a shooting in Detroit. A white officer shot an unarmed black teenager reaching for his phone. The kid survived, but barely. The officer is claiming he feared for his life, said he thought the phone was a gun." "Jesus," Ethan muttered. "Not again." "The family's lawyer is already invoking your case, calling it Cole Standard, evidence of pattern and practice. The media's all over it. They want to know if you'll speak about it." After ending the call, Ethan sat in heavy silence. Patricia understood without words. Every new incident reopened. His wounds reminded him how easily he could have been another hashtag, another statistic. "It never ends, does it?" he said quietly. No, Patricia admitted. But it's different now. That officer in Detroit, he's already been suspended, not placed on administrative leave with pay. The investigation started immediately, not after protests forced it. The body camera footage was released within hours, not hidden for months. Your case changed the playbook, Ethan. Maya burst through the back door, cheeks red from cold snow in her hair. Daddy, come see my snowman. I made him a police officer like Lieutenant Williams. The two adults exchanged glances and followed Maya outside. The snowman wore a cap made of twigs and had a badge drawn with food coloring. But what struck Ethan was the stick figure family Maya had built next to it, clearly meant to represent different people standing together. See, Maya explained proudly. The police officer is protecting everyone, the tall one, the short one, the different colored snow ones I made with dirt mixed in. Everyone gets protected the same. Patricia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. That's exactly right, sweetheart. That's how it should be. That evening, Dr. Angela Foster called. Her voice was professional, but warm, the kind of academic who hadn't let years of research dehumanize her subjects. Agent Cole, I know this is a difficult request. You have no obligation to help the man who traumatized you and your family. But I believe what we're documenting could be groundbreaking, a real-time transformation of someone from perpetrator to advocate, with all the messy complexity that entails. What exactly are you documenting? The psychology of racist policing from the inside out. Keller's been remarkably candid about his upbringing. His academy experience, the subtle and not-so-subtle ways he was conditioned to see threat in black bodies. He's given me access to his personal journals from before the incident. They're disturbing, but illuminating. Ethan considered this. And you want me to provide what the victim's perspective? I want you to provide the human cost, Dr. Foster said. The reality of what these biases mean for real people, real families. Keller understands intellectually what he did wrong, but understanding the actual impact, the ripple effects, the generational trauma, that's different. Send me your research proposal. I'll review it, but I'm not promising anything. 3 days later, Ethan found himself sitting in a conference room at Georgetown University, facing Dr. Foster and her research team. The proposal was thorough academic, but also deeply personal. They weren't just studying statistics, but stories, not just patterns, but people. This conversation would be recorded, Dr. Foster explained. With your permission, excerpts would be included in the final study. You would have full approval rights over any quotes used. What makes you think Keller's transformation is genuine? Ethan asked. How do you know this isn't just another performance, a way to reduce his sentence or rehabilitate his image? Dr. Foster pulled out a file, hesitated, then slid it across the table. This is from his journal written the night before he confessed. He gave me permission to share it with you if you agreed to meet. Ethan read Keller's handwriting, cramped and urgent. I keep seeing his face when I close my eyes. Not angry or threatening, just confused. A man reaching for cereal, and I almost killed him for it. How many times did I do this before, create danger where none existed? How many people did I terrify who never made the news? I was trained to be a warrior, but warriors need enemies, so I created them out of innocent people. I pointed my gun at a father buying breakfast for his daughter. I am the monster parents warn their children about. I am the reason people fear police. I am everything wrong with the system, and I wore a badge while being it. Ethan set the paper down, his hands slightly unsteady. The raw honesty of it, the self-awareness, was unexpected. He's also been corresponding with some of the officers who came forward after his confession, Dr. Foster added. He started a kind of informal support group for officers confronting their own biases. They call themselves former Keller's officers who recognize themselves in what he did and want to change. How many? 43 at last count, from departments across the country. They meet virtually once a week from the prison computer lab. That night, Ethan discussed it with Denise and Marcus over dinner. Maya was at a sleepover giving the adults freedom to talk openly. "You don't owe him anything," Denise said firmly. "Not your time, not your story, not your forgiveness." "I know that," Ethan replied. "But this isn't about what I owe him. It's about what might help prevent the next incident." Marcus, who'd been quiet, finally spoke. "Remember the Robinson case from 3 years ago? Black teenager shot in his grandmother's backyard." Ethan nodded. They'd all worked that case, had seen the devastation up close. "That cop never admitted wrongdoing. Still doesn't. He's on another force 2 states over now. At least Keller is trying to make his crime mean something more than just another tragedy." "Or he's trying to make himself feel better," Denise countered. "Redemption narrative sells better than villain story." They argued late into the night, but Ethan had already made his decision. The next morning, he called Dr. Foster and agreed to participate with conditions. The interviews would happen at his FBI office, not at the prison. He would not meet with Keller directly, and Maya's name would be kept out of all documentation. The first interview session lasted 3 hours. Dr. Foster was skilled drawing out details Ethan hadn't even realized he'd been holding. The moment when time slowed, as Keller's finger moved toward the trigger. The sound Maya made when she saw the news coverage. The way grocery stores still made his heart rate spike. "I've been shot at by drug dealers," Ethan said at one point. "I've had knives pulled on me, been in high-speed chases, had contracts put on my life by cartels. None of that scared me as much as that kid with a badge in a grocery store. Because criminals, terrorists, they're choosing to be dangerous. Keller was dangerous because the system told him to be trained, him to be rewarded him for being." Dr. Foster recorded everything her team, taking notes. "How has this affected your relationship with local law enforcement?" Ethan thought of Chief Doyle, of Patricia Williams, of the officers who'd stood guard at Maya's school. "It's complicated. I know there are good cops. I work with them every day. But I also know that any traffic stop, any encounter could be my last, if I meet another Keller who hasn't had his awakening yet." "And Maya? How has she processed this?" "She's 7. She shouldn't have to process almost losing her father to prejudice. But she's had to. She knows that some people will see her daddy as dangerous just because of how he looks. She knows to be extra careful, extra polite to keep her hands visible. 7 years old, and she's already learned the survival tactics every black child learns." The weight of those words hung in the room. Dr. Foster's assistant was crying quietly. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. Ethan received a call from Warden Mitchell at the prison. Keller had been placed in protective custody after the attack, but he'd refused to name his attackers to authorities. "He says putting them in solitary won't change their minds," the warden explained. "He wants to stay in general population, says isolation won't help him understand the culture he was part of. We can't force protective custody if he refuses it." "He's going to get himself killed," Ethan said. "Maybe, but he says, and I'm quoting here, Agent Cole faced death for just existing while black. The least I can do is face danger for admitting I was wrong." That same day, the verdict came in from Detroit. The officer who'd shot the teenager was convicted of attempted murder, the first such conviction in that city's history. The prosecutor specifically cited the Cole standard in closing arguments, arguing that fear alone, especially fear rooted in bias, was not justification for deadly force. The reaction was swift and polarized. Police unions condemned the verdict as a war on cops. Civil rights organizations hailed it as long overdue accountability. Protests erupted on both sides, though notably many officers joined the reform advocates, carrying signs reading, "Good cops don't defend bad shoots," and "Justice makes us all safer." Chief Doyle called Ethan that evening. "The federal monitors just released their preliminary report on our department. We failed in almost every category: training, oversight, complaint processing. But they also noted the improvements we've started making. Patricia's new training program is being called a model for national implementation." "That's good, Frank." Is it I spent 30 years thinking I was one of the good ones running a clean department? Turns out I was just blind to the rot. How many Ethans did we fail before you? How many didn't have federal credentials to save them? The question haunted them both. There was no answer that didn't hurt. A month later, Ethan agreed to something he'd sworn he wouldn't do: a joint interview with Dr. Foster about the research project. Not with Keller, but about him. It would air on 60 Minutes, bringing national attention to the study. The night before filming, Maya asked to sleep in his bed, something she hadn't done in months. "Daddy, are you scared?" "Of what, baby?" "Of talking about the scared policeman on TV. Won't it make people angry?" Ethan pulled her close. "Some people, yes, but maybe it will help others understand. Maybe it will help make sure other daddies don't go through what I did. And other kids don't get scared like I did." Exactly. The interview was conducted by Anderson Cooper in Ethan's living room. They'd wanted to film in the grocery store, but Ethan had refused that space, didn't need to be a monument to trauma. Cooper was direct but respectful. "Agent Cole Ryan Keller is serving 4 years for nearly killing you. Some say that's too much for a crime where no shots were fired. Others say it's not enough for what amounts to attempted murder. Where do you stand?" "I stand for accountability," Ethan replied. "Keller is facing consequences for his actions. That's more than most victims of police violence ever see. Is it perfect justice? No. But perfect justice would mean it never happened at all. Dr. Foster's research suggests Keller's transformation is genuine. Do you believe people like him can truly change?" Ethan had thought about this question for weeks. "I believe people can learn to recognize their biases and choose to act differently. Whether that's the same as changing, I don't know. But I know that Keller admitting his racism publicly did something important. It made it impossible for others to deny it exists." "Have you forgiven him?" "Forgiveness isn't mine to give or withhold. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been seen as a threat for existing in their own skin. I can't forgive on their behalf." The interview aired to record ratings. The response was exactly as polarized as expected, but something interesting emerged from the noise. Police officers, both active and retired, began reaching out to Dr. Foster's team, wanting to participate in the study, wanting to examine their own biases. One letter published in the Washington Post came from a veteran officer in Chicago. "I saw myself in Keller, and it terrified me. How many times have I let fear dictate my actions? How many citizens have I traumatized without even realizing it? If he can face his demons, maybe I can too." Meanwhile, in prison, Keller continued his work with Dr. Foster, now teaching a course to other inmates about recognizing and confronting bias. His jaw had healed crooked from the attack, leaving him with a slight speech impediment that somehow made his words carry more weight, a permanent reminder of the price of change. He wrote to Ethan again, not expecting a response. "I learned something today. One of the inmates here, Marcus, told me his son won't go to grocery stores anymore. Saw the video of what I did to you, and now he's terrified of being next. I created generational trauma, Agent Cole. I taught a child to fear something as normal as buying food. I don't ask for your forgiveness because I haven't earned it. But I want you to know that I think about that child, about your child, about all the children who learn to fear because of people like me. And I'm trying to become someone who helps unlearn that fear, even if I can never undo causing it." Ethan read the letter 3 times before filing it away. He didn't respond, but he didn't throw it away either. Spring arrived slowly that year, the snow reluctant to yield to warmth. But eventually, it did, as it always does. The grocery store. That grocery store announced it was creating a scholarship fund in Ethan's name for local students pursuing criminal justice degrees with a focus on community policing and reform. At the announcement ceremony, Ethan stood with Maya as she cut the ribbon. She was 8 now, taller, more aware of the world's complexities, but still possessed of that fierce optimism that made Ethan both proud and worried. "My daddy says justice is like spring," Maya said into the microphone, surprising everyone with her impromptu speech. Sometimes it takes a really long time to come, and winter feels like it will last forever. But if we keep working, keep believing, keep pushing through the cold, eventually things bloom again. Harold Brennan, now a regular fixture at community police reform meetings, wiped his eyes. Margaret Chen, promoted to store manager, smiled through her own tears. Even Chief Doyle, weathered by months of criticism and reform efforts, seemed moved. That evening, as Ethan tucked Maya into bed, she asked, "Daddy, do you think the scared policeman learned his lesson?" "I think he's learning it, baby. Every day." "Good. Because everyone deserves a chance to learn better." Ethan kissed her forehead, marveling at her capacity for grace. Yes, they do. But they also have to face consequences while they're learning. Like timeout, but for grown-ups. Something like that. As he closed her door, Ethan's phone buzzed with a news alert. Another shooting, this time in Phoenix. Another unarmed citizen, another officer claiming fear. But this time, something was different. The officer had been immediately suspended, the footage released within hours, and the chief of police had already called for an independent investigation, citing the Cole Standard as department policy. It wasn't enough, it would never be enough until these shootings stopped entirely. But it was movement glacially slow, but perceptible. The winter of injustice was still harsh, but perhaps, just perhaps, Maya was right about spring.